Welcome. Today we're opening up the source materials on a case that is, I think, one of the most unsettling and psychologically contradictory crime stories of the digital age. We're talking about the case of Philip Markoff.
Right, the story that unfolded so quickly back in the spring of 2009. It just dominated the national headlines.
And led the media to give him that infamous name, the Craigslist killer.
Exactly.
We've gathered a pretty significant volume of documentation for our examination today. We have police reports, court filings, a lot of the media coverage from the time.
And a couple of the investigative books that really tried to get inside the mystery of his double life.
Our mission here is specific. We're going to meticulously pull out the essential facts, build a clear timeline of the crimes he was charged with, the investigation that followed, and, most importantly, really try to get a handle on the sheer, almost unbelievable contrast at the core of this case.
It's that paradox, isn't it? The chasm between the public persona he had and the private actions he was accused of. That's what made this case just explode in the public consciousness.
Before we go any further, though, we have to pause and acknowledge the devastating reality that sits at the foundation of this whole story.
We must. Our discussion is based on the facts of the investigation, but our genuine and sincere sympathy has to be with the victims. Julissa Brisbane, Tricia Leffler, and Cynthia Melton, and of course their families.
The violence involved in these charges is extreme, and we are approaching this material with the seriousness it demands.
As you said, the media scrutiny was just, it was immediate, and it was intense, and it was primarily because Markoff represented the absolute antithesis of what you'd think of as a violent offender, at least on the surface.
Right, he was an American medical student.
Educated, from a high-achieving background. His life was, structured for success.
Yeah.
So when the accusations of armed robbery, kidnapping, and murder came out, the contradiction was just so jarring, it drove the entire narrative.
The sources we have really force you to confront this idea that a meticulously maintained public life can hide something profoundly destructive. Okay, so let's unpack this facade. The image that the sources keep coming back to, this nice, smart boy persona.
Right.
Philip Markoff was born in Sherrill, New York in 1986. His father, Richard Markoff, was a practicing dentist. His mother was Susan Haynes. He seemed to have a stable, very conventional upbringing with an older brother and a half-sister.
And his academic path is, I think, really key to understanding who he was supposed to be before all this happened.
He went to Vernon Verona Sherrill High School, graduated in 2004, and by all accounts, he was a model student.
A member of the National Honor Society.
Which isn't just about grades, right? It's supposed to be about character, service, leadership.
Exactly. And he was involved in all these civic-minded things like the history club, the youth court. He was on the school bowling and golf teams. It just paints this picture of a completely well-rounded, ambitious young man.
And that ambition didn't stop. It propelled him straight onto the most rigorous professional track there is.
The pre-med track.
Yeah.
He went to SUNY Albany, graduated in 2007. And crucially, he had to have done well on the MCAT, the medical college admission test.
Which is a huge hurdle.
It's a massive gatekeeper for the medical profession. So just passing that and getting into medical school already places you in this very elite, very high-pressure group of students.
So by April 2009, when these events happened, he was a second-year student at Boston University School of Medicine.
And we should probably contextualize what that means. Med school, especially at that level, is a known pressure cooker. It's years of high-stakes tests, sleep deprivation, and just intense academic competition.
The sources suggest that this environment was really the center of his whole world, a life that demanded total dedication and left, you'd think, very little room for error.
Or for anything else, supposedly. Yeah. And it's noted that he was only suspended from BU Med School after the formal charges were filed. So he maintained his status right up until the moment of public exposure.
It's that sheer weight of expectation, the future doctor, the defined path, that makes the alleged deviation so hard to process. And nothing symbolized that future more than his relationship with Megan McAllister.
Absolutely. That relationship was the anchor of his public identity. They met back in 2005. They were both volunteers at the Albany Medical Center ER.
So again, you see this narrative building. Two people dedicated to helping others, both focused on a future in medicine.
A story of shared ambition and service. And by 2009, this wasn't just some college romance. They were meticulously planning their future.
Right, they were engaged.
Precisely. And the wedding wasn't just some vague idea. It was set. August 14th, 2009. McAllister herself was about to start medical school that fall.
So they were building this power couple life, a double doctor household.
Highly successful, highly respectable.
Hmm.
The sources really framed this relationship as integral to the mask that Markoff was wearing. He was financially secure, intellectually thriving, and romantically committed.
So when that structure collapsed, it wasn't just about losing a girlfriend. It was losing the entire predefined architecture of his life.
The sources definitely suggest the pressure was unsustainable, though any real psychological reports are either sealed or speculative. The common theory, the one explored in the true crime books on the case, it revolves around this idea of dissociation,
Creating a separate identity.
a separate dark identity to relieve the intense pressure of the virtuous one. He was living a life where failure just wasn't an option, and the only outlet, allegedly, was through this secretive, anonymous dominance and violence that he accessed through the internet.
A devastating gap between the perfection of the medical student and the alleged criminal aggression. So we need to transition now from the man to the terrifying sequence of events that shattered his life and, of course, destroyed the lives of his victims.
And it all happened in such a short window of time. Just 6 days in April 2009. 3 violent incidents, 2 states.
The defining characteristic and the very reason for that media nickname was the method.
It was. The sources confirmed that the victims were all targeted through ads they placed on Craigslist. Specifically, these were women who had posted ads offering services, erotic, massage, lap dance services.
And this platform provided that element of anonymity for the predator.
It did. It allowed Markoff, allegedly, to hide his real identity while he selected his targets. And that method is crucial. When he contacted these women, he was reportedly posing as a customer, setting up a meeting in a hotel room, which is an inherently high-risk location for these service providers.
The speed of it all suggests a compulsion, an escalation.
It really does. Once the method was established, it seems to have escalated very, very quickly.
Okay, let's walk through the timeline. It starts on Friday, April 10, 2009, in Boston.
Right. The first known incident was at the Westin Copley Place Hotel, a very upscale place. The victim was Tricia Leffler, who was working as an escort.
And according to the sources, he entered the room as a client.
Yes, but it escalated to extreme violence almost immediately. She was bound, gagged, and then robbed at gunpoint.
So this first act already established a very aggressive and coercive pattern. It was about control and theft, not the services advertised.
Exactly, a chilling precursor. But then, just 4 days later, the violence intensified dramatically.
Tuesday, April 14th. This is the incident that resulted in a murder.
Yes, also in Boston. The victim was Julissa Brisman. She had advertised massage services online. She was found dead at the Copley Marriott. The sources indicate she was shot.
And we have to say again, the loss of Mrs. Brisman's life is a profound tragedy. She was murdered violently and senselessly.
Absolutely.
Was the method identical between that first incident and the murder of Julissa Brisman?
Based on the evidence the police gathered, the methods were chillingly similar. Both women allegedly contacted via Craigslist. Both met in large, well-known Boston hotels.
So the target profile and the means of approach were consistent.
Incredibly consistent. It suggests the perpetrator was either refining or perhaps just escalating the same predatory pattern. And this similarity was immediately obvious to the police, which allowed them to connect the crime so fast.
And the spree didn't even stop there. 2 days after the murder, the activity crosses state lines.
Right. Thursday, April 16th, in Warwick, Rhode Island. The third incident. The victim here was Cynthia Melton, an exotic dancer offering lap dance services. This was an attempted robbery at a Holiday Inn Express.
And in this case, the attacker fled before completing the robbery.
Yes, sources note he fled before inflicting fatal harm.
What's remarkable and what really allowed law enforcement to mobilize so fast was this incredibly condensed time frame. 6 days, 3 crimes, 2 states, 1 method.
That's the key analytical point. The short window, just 144 hours. And the striking similarity in the methods meant the police weren't trying to link disparate cold cases. They knew they were dealing with a highly active, high-risk offender.
So they immediately suspected it was one person.
Immediately. And that was crucial for the speed of the arrest. It signaled an urgent need to stop a potentially escalating pattern, which led them straight into the digital investigation.
The testimony from the surviving victims, coupled with the digital footprint Markoff allegedly left, must have provided a wealth of information.
It was a perfect storm of evidence. The witnesses who survived could describe the perpetrator, and the digital records of communication served as proof that these interactions had happened. Physical and digital evidence converging almost immediately.
The sources that detail the investigation, they really read like a case study in modern digital forensics.
They do. They show how quickly law enforcement can just dismantle a seemingly anonymous online persona.
It seems Markoff's attempts to maintain his operational security, they just weren't enough against 21st century tracing technology.
Not at all. And what's fascinating is how the investigation bridged that virtual world with the physical one. He allegedly believed he was protected by using Craigslist, but he didn't account for several key factors.
What were the main evidence sources that led them to him?
Three main things: security camera footage, cell phone activity, and email evidence. Those are the factors that linked him to the April 10th and 14th incidents.
So let's look at the technical side. How do you go from a Craigslist ad to identifying a Boston University medical student?
Well, you can break it down. First, the hotels. The Westin and the Marriott are high-end places with expensive security camera networks. So police got footage of a man matching the description from the first victim, Tricia Leffler.
So they have a visual profile.
A visual profile entering and exiting lobbies and hallways near the crime scenes at the right times. Second, the digital trail. The communications relied on specific email addresses and phone numbers.
So police issued warrants for that information?
Exactly. The sources suggest Markoff might have used a burner email, but eventually that account has to be accessed from somewhere with an IP address. And that access point often correlated with his home or his campus network.
And the cell phone data must have just solidified that geographic link.
That was the smoking gun. Cell tower triangulation. Police had a warrant for the phone number he used, and they were able to track the location of that device at the exact times of the crimes.
So it placed his phone at the Westin on April 10th and the Marriott on April 14th.
At the exact times. A simultaneous spatial and temporal match. It was virtually irrefutable circumstantial evidence.
Despite this overwhelming trail, the moment of the arrest must have still been a shock.
Oh, it was dramatically ironic. He was arrested on April 20th in Walpole, Massachusetts. And the circumstances are crucial. He was in the car with his fiancée, Megan McAllister.
Where were they going?
They were on their way to Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. The irony of being caught while heading on a leisure trip with the woman he was about to marry, just days after allegedly committing murder. It just highlights the immense deception he was maintaining.
Then came the arraignment, and that's when the public learned about the evidence they found.
Yes, the arraignment was on April 21st. It was highly publicized. Markoff pleaded not guilty to everything: murder, robbery, kidnapping. He maintained that facade of innocence.
But the prosecutor laid out the inventory from his apartment.
And that evidence directly matched the tools used in the crimes. Specifically, they found a semi-automatic handgun consistent with the weapon described in the first robbery.
And the binding materials.
Even more damning. They found wrist restraints, the kind known as flex cuffs, and rolls of duct tape.
And the sources mention a shocking number of flex cuffs.
Around 60. 60 flex cuffs were found. This wasn't just someone who happened to own a gun. This was a specific collection of items used to subdue and control people, exactly matching the reported methods.
I mean, trying to explain away 60 flex cuffs in a med student's apartment, it seems impossible.
The defense sources from that time only offered vague affirmations of his innocence, suggesting there could be another context. But for a jury, the combined evidence would have been devastating. They didn't need a confession.
Following the arraignment, the legal process moved fast.
It did. He was held without bail. A grand jury indicted him for first-degree murder, armed robbery, and the other charges from Boston. And then Rhode Island issued its own warrant for the April 16th incident.
And they postponed that case.
Yes, they postponed it, pending the resolution of the murder charges in Massachusetts. This phase marked the definitive collapse of his professional life and really the start of his psychological descent.
The media frenzy that followed the arrest was relentless. He was immediately vilified. I mean, the ultimate symbol of duplicity.
Well, the sources note some extremely harsh labels used by the press, like monstrous prostitute predator.
But the most immediate and personal fallout was the complete destruction of his relationship with Megan McAllister.
Initially, she was in disbelief. Her first public statements were all about loyalty. She stood by him, said he wouldn't hurt a fly, described him as beautiful inside and out.
Which just shows how successful his deception had been.
She completely believed in the structure they had built. But once the evidence was revealed, the gun, the 60 flex cuffs, that faith was profoundly tested.
And the sources detail 2 critical visits she made to him in jail that basically sealed their fate.
The first one came quickly, April 29th, just 9 days after his arrest. The purpose of that visit was singular and tragic. She officially called off their wedding.
That wedding date, August 14th, it had been the symbol of their entire future.
It was. And by canceling it, she was formally dissolving the life that Markoff had built. Then about 6 weeks later, in June, she visited a second time.
With even more finality.
Even more. She visited on June 11th and told him she did not plan to see him again for a long period of time, if ever. That wasn't just about the wedding. That was about severing the last thread connecting him to his former identity.
That must have been devastating. So he's awaiting trial at the Nashua Street Jail. What did the sources say about his state of mind there?
For a sheltered, high-achieving student suddenly stripped of everything, the transition was extreme. The sources say he was placed on suicide watch multiple times and spent periods in the jail's psychiatric unit. It confirms a sustained mental fragility.
And the suicide attempts he made, they seem to align directly with these personal losses.
They do. They offer a clear psychological roadmap of his collapse. He made one attempt just 3 days after his arrest, so the initial shock was overwhelming.
And another after his fiancée broke up with him for good.
Exactly, after that June 11th visit. But maybe the most symbolic act of desperation was on the day that should have been his wedding day.
August 14th, 2009.
That specific date, the anniversary of the life he lost, it triggered a major psychological crisis and another attempt. It really underscores that the loss of his identity and his fiancée was the primary force driving his despair.
So even as the trial was being delayed from July 2010 to March 2011, his own internal clock was running on this emotional timeline.
Exactly. The trial delays meant he was just facing this indeterminate future in a cell, with the full weight of the evidence against him and total isolation from the life he'd known. The fact that the attempts were always tied to these dates, the arrest, the breakup, the wedding day, it showed the vulnerability was specific and recurring.
The case, which was defined by this profound public contradiction, it ended in an equally dramatic and symbolic final act.
His successful suicide. And the timing is deeply significant. It was August 15, 2010, at age 24.
Exactly 1 year and 1 day after his scheduled wedding date.
It just reinforces the idea that the collapse of his planned life with Megan McAllister was the catalyst. It was a planned, deliberate end tied irrevocably to the date that represented his failed future.
The method he used suggests just an extraordinary level of planning and resolve, especially for someone inside a secured cell.
It was disturbingly complex. The sources detail how thorough he was to make sure this attempt succeeded, because he was known to be a risk. And the choice of tool is highly symbolic.
The primitive scalpel.
Yes. He fashioned a weapon using a pen and a piece of metal, creating what the sources call a primitive scalpel, a chilling phrase given his medical aspirations.
He used a dark mirror of a surgeon's tool for self-destruction.
And he used it to cut arteries in multiple locations, his ankles, his legs, and his neck. This was designed to ensure fatal blood loss.
But he took additional steps beyond that.
Yes. In a final, desperate series of actions, he also swallowed wads of toilet paper and tightened a plastic bag over his head with gauze to cause asphyxiation. The level of planning, the use of multiple methods, it shows a resolve born of just absolute despair.
And the scene in the cell, the message he left behind, it turned his death into a final personal communication.
It did. According to the sources, the scene was emotionally profound. He had written his former fiancée's name and their pet names for each other on the cell wall.
In his own blood.
In his own blood. And photographs of the two of them were scattered around the cell floor.
So his last message wasn't about the crimes or the victims. It was a testament to the connection he had lost.
It was. The sources overwhelmingly suggest that his public life, his career, his future were all defined by that relationship. Once that was gone, along with his freedom, his self-worth just crumbled. His final communication focused entirely on the personal relationship he destroyed.
And with his death, the criminal proceedings just ended.
Abruptly. The court never had the chance to deliver a verdict or fully explore his motives in a public trial.
So with the case terminating because of his suicide, the story officially concluded without any judicial resolution. But the narrative of the Craigslist killer was already cemented in the cultural memory.
That nickname was pivotal. It connected these anonymous online platforms with real-world violence, right at a time when the true crime genre was starting to take its modern shape. It was a cautionary tale for the internet age.
And the contrast, the medical student committing these acts, just amplified the horror and the fascination.
It became shorthand for a kind of hidden digital depravity. And that intense public interest, as you often see, quickly translated into book deals.
The literary adaptations came out almost immediately.
They did. First, 7 Days of Rage by Paula Rosa came out in 2009, and then in 2010, A Date with Death by Michelle McPhee offered more investigative detail. These books really cemented that narrative of the secret life versus the public image.
And of course, the television landscape, especially true crime, made sure this case became a permanent fixture.
CBS's 48 Hours Mystery was quick to cover it in 2009 with an episode called Craigslist, Classified for Murder. Those early news programs really laid out the factual breakdown for the public.
But it was the TV movie that probably reached the broadest audience.
I think so, The Craigslist Killer. It premiered on Lifetime in January 2011, based on McPhee's book. And that adaptation in particular really focused on the relationship between Markoff and McAllister, playing up the dramatic irony of their destroyed future.
Which is interesting how the media frames these things. The focus was on the duality and the heartbreak more than the complex forensic trail.
Because that's the emotional core of the case, right?
Yeah.
The betrayal and the destruction of the perfect life is more relatable, more dramatic than cell tower triangulation.
And the story has kept being retold.
Over and over. It was on the premiere of Murder Made Me Famous in 2017 and on an investigation discovery show, See No Evil, in 2019, which focused on the surveillance footage.
So when you see the sustained media adaptation across a decade, what does that really tell us about our fascination with this case?
I think it speaks to a deep, inherent anxiety. The Markoff case perfectly encapsulated the modern fear that people around us, especially those who project competence and success, might be hiding a violent, separate identity that's facilitated by the internet.
He wasn't the stereotype.
Not at all. He was successful, intelligent, and operating in plain sight. His story fundamentally challenged the idea that you can trust outward appearances, especially when anonymity is so easy to access online.
The fact that it was all tied to Craigslist, an everyday platform, just injected this layer of threat into routine internet use.
Exactly. It suggested that a hidden identity could coexist right alongside a meticulous, high-pressure professional life.
The analysis of his life, the intensity of med school, the defined future against the alleged violence, it reveals how much stress and secrecy can just erode a person's functionality.
It really does. It suggests that for some people, the pressure of achieving that perfect structure is so immense that when you combine it with the potential for anonymous activity, it can create a devastating emotional fracture. To synthesize what we've pulled from these sources, the primary insight really remains this profound, fatal tension. Philip Markoff was a high-performing medical student with a future scheduled down to the very day, who was simultaneously charged with being a violent predator operating in an anonymous online space. And what the sources most powerfully reveal isn't just the sequence of alleged crimes, but the complete and catastrophic disintegration of his structured life the moment his secretive activity was exposed.
His final acts in that cell, the primitive scalpel, the specific date, the bloody message, they all underscore that the loss of his relationship and the future it symbolized was the internal trigger for his death.
And it brought the entire tragic narrative to an abrupt, unresolved end.
That reliance on online platforms is really the thread that pulls this story into the present day. We saw how technology, Craigslist, cell records, email tracing played this definitive role in both enabling the alleged crimes and ensuring his rapid arrest.
A double-edged sword.
It is. The sources confirm the dual nature of our modern digital existence. It provides cover, but it also leaves indelible proof. So, as we conclude, consider this modern challenge. In an era where digital tools enable these highly specific yet anonymous interactions, how has the promise of online privacy been fundamentally undermined by the certainty of forensic tracking? Thank you for joining us for this extensive examination of the facts surrounding the case of Philip Markoff.
Thanks for listening.